Okay, today's discussion is going to be kind of an odd one. We're not talking about a movie. We're not talking about a TV show, though it did air on HBO. We are not talking about even what would traditionally be considered a stand up special. We're talking about almost more of a hybrid of a stand up special and a one man show. Long Story Short by Colin Quinn. I first saw this on HBO 15 years ago, maybe. And I love this too. If you can see, I bought this used at an actual video store, and it's got that sun bleached look, like it's been sitting there, just sunlight pouring in on it. I remember that from being a kid, just going to the video store, and some of those tapes were so faded. You know, the covers, it was fantastic. But anyway, a long story short is the history of the world. The whole history of the world, done in about an hour and a half, maybe, of comedic gold, in my opinion. Colin Quinn's somebody who, prior to this, I had never really paid attention to. He was on Saturday Night Live, hosted Weekend Update for a while. I think he's considered one of the weakest of the Weekend Update hosts. I didn't know anything about him. I know he did something on, I think, MTV. Never saw it. So I didn't really have any reason to want to check this out. But I think I must have seen a commercial for it or something and thought, that looks amusing. And I have watched it so many times in the years since then. I don't think 6 months has gone by since I bought this DVD I bought it in like I said, a video store probably about 5 years ago. And I was like, oh my God, I remember that special. And I bought it and I've watched it, I think, at least every 6 months since. I think during the early days of the pandemic, I watched it like 4 times just to have something to cheer me up. So Colin Quinn tells you the history of the world, kind of going by empires. He goes from one empire to the other, from the Greeks to the Romans, and he talks about the Chinese Empire and the British and the French, and up to the United States. And history has never been so entertaining. The guy is clearly smart. I mean, this is not the kind of material where you know just a little bit about history and then you make fun of it. This guy has to have really done his homework and really probably had this knowledge already in his head for the most part, because why else would you want to do this when you could do something more traditional? You can just do a stand-up special, you can whatever. This is a history lesson, and it's a very good history lesson. It's also really funny. And that's obviously subjective. There will be people who are like, I don't like Colin Quinn. I've recommended some of his stuff to people before, and they come back to me and they're like, yeah, that wasn't for me. Maybe it was too cerebral. I don't know. It's funny that it is sort of, he is a very working class stand-up. He's got that gruff old man thing kind of going for him now. I feel like he kind of always had the gruff old man thing going for him, even when he was a young man. And he's just, to me, he's a charming guy. He's no bullshit. And he's done several, he did a special about New York, the history of New York. He did a special on Netflix about red states versus blue states. Very, very smart stuff. I'm not going to try and replicate it here or tell you any of my favorite jokes because I would just butcher them. And maybe I'm not selling this all that well because maybe I'm making it sound a little bit dull. It's a history lesson? No. It's really funny, and he makes it relate to today. He shows how, like, these cultures formed and how what happened, like, hundreds or thousands of years ago to these cultures impacts the way that people in those cultures still act today. It's and usually ties it back to people who maybe have immigrated to the United States and how that has sort of all melted together into something new. Now, he does do he does do the accents, and he does them very well. There's not a single, I don't think the guy would do an accent unless he could do it well. You wouldn't think he could do voices. You know, this sort of gruff old Irish dude from New York. You wouldn't think that he could do a Nigerian accent and not do it offensive, but to do it the way that it actually sounds. Some people nowadays have a problem with that kind of stuff. Okay. Well, I don't know what to tell you. You know, he's telling you the history of these places. And, you know, this was like maybe around 2010, I think, that this aired originally. And now you kind of hear this thing, well, he shouldn't be telling that story. It's not his story to tell. I don't know what to tell you. He would disagree. I disagree with that. And again, it's not offensive. Like, you would think, he doesn't, like, for instance, do, like, the Chinese accent, you know, when he's talking about the Chinese Empire, except for one moment where he's talking about, like, a Chinese restaurant in today. And he says 3 words, right? And again, I'm not going to spoil the joke or try and explain the joke too much, but he says 3 words in a kind of vague accent, not like a offensive kind of, trying to think of a way to explain this without doing an offensive accent. He does it in an accurate way, in a way that, like, yeah, I've met that person. I've heard that person speak. Oh, if you're easily offended, maybe don't check this out. And I mean easily offended, because he doesn't do anything that I think plays too much into anything offensive, anything like that would make, there might be a cringy moment or two, but you laugh at it because he means it to be cringy. You know, he's not oblivious. Great show, great little comedic history of the world. I'm going to go ahead and give this 4 out of 5 stars. It's aged really well, in my opinion. I know some people will disagree. But for me, this is the kind of person that I want to. I would listen to Colin Quinn tell me a not comedic history of the world. You want somebody who is not going to tiptoe around you, who's going to tell you straight. And Colin Quinn, he is a straight shooter, and he did one hell of a funny one-man show.
The worlds.
Sort of gave myself the challenge of, okay,